Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now your host, Demeere.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I'm extremely happy that I have an awesome guest again. And this time I am talking to Mr. Hock Hochheim. Hock, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Excellent. So for everybody, we had a little bit of trouble with Zoom, getting the connections to sync up. I'm sure the satellites in outer space are trying to make our connection stable, but if it isn't, we'll sort it out. So that said, Hock, we're going to just go right to the questions. Like I just said before we started the interview, for the people who have been living under a rock and don't know you, could you just briefly give a little bit of your bio?
Yes, well, the rock thing is interesting. I always like to start these out by saying, rumors of my success are greatly exaggerated. So many people do not know who I am, and that's pretty typical. But I just retired Texas detective. I spent most of my time as a detective, and I did, I was a military police patrol and investigation, U.S. Army, and then 23 years working in Texas. Then I was a private investigator for 3 years, which was kind of a big disappointment in many ways. Once you are an official state-powered detective, you have very little power as a private investigator. So that was kind of tough to adjust to. And of course, I'll be teaching at a big Filipino Prasis event in 2 years. And the reason I bring that up is the host did a background on me that better than I do or have. And he just said that in 2022, next year, I'll have been in the martial arts for 50 years. And I never thought of that. That's a long time, And I said, well, now, wait a second. That's pretty long. And I started in Ed Parker Kempo in 1972, and not as a kid. I was about, I guess, 19 or 20. And back then, they did not even allow kids to be in any kind of class. And in Texas, I stumbled upon this martial arts school in the 70s, which was unusual. And they had the front glass was painted red up to about 4 feet. Not only were there not children allowed in, but children could not even look in. That's the mentality of those olden days, Yeah. And so I've never stopped doing stuff ever since then. And whether it be a whole host of things, boxing, Aikijitsu, Kempo, as Filipino martial arts for all that time. And for this next year will be my 26th year of traveling, on average 11, 12 countries a year. However, COVID has made a huge dent in that. And so I'm just pretty much stuck going around America right now. But I've been busy, doing that, going to all these different countries, teaching. Mostly hand, stick, knife, gun combatives, but I'm more than happy to do any kind of Filipino martial arts. Whatever people want me to do, I'm happy to do it.
You have, a tremendous amount of training and experience, in a wide variety of styles. And I'm just looking at the bio on your site, and here's a question that I wanted to ask you. So you started with Ed Parker's Kempo Karate, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
I have some friends who also trained extensively in that art, and one of my teachers, unfortunately late Bob Orlando, also trained that, and I saw a little bit of that from his end. But I know that in some of Ed Parker schools there was pretty harsh training, and that it was very intense and hard contact at times and so on. Was that your experience as well, or was it different?
Actually, by 70, I'm going to say 71 or 72, they kind of realized that they could not have blood and guts vomit classes and have a business. And so when I started, it was pretty much the end of that era,
Yeah.
and everybody that I knew, uh, uh, these guys were first generation Parker black belts, and that they were tough as nails. And we can't forget that Dan Inosanto was a 1960s Ed Parker black belt.
Yeah.
And so, people like to get to criticize about how fancy, dashy Filipino martial arts are, but these guys were tough, and the stories, that went on in that era were extremely tough. And we were surrounded in Dallas by these various kickboxing tournaments of the day, and the famous guys then. I guess Chuck Norris would be the only one people would remember. And some of these guys had boxing gloves on and kickboxed, and some of them didn't. It depended on the rules of the tournament, and they were rough. They would have an ambulance nearby waiting, and they were grudge matches, and they were some tough times.
Yeah, that's what I've heard from several of my friends who were maybe a little bit after the era, but not that far after. In that, back in those days, it was just that's how you trained, and it's not unsimilar as to how things were here in my country, here in Belgium, and in other European countries. Is that people took it pretty seriously, especially when you sometimes compare it to what you see nowadays in many of the more commercial gyms and schools, where it's, well, I'll try to stay polite, but it sometimes looks like it's a daycare center as opposed to martial arts class. And there's a place for that, obviously. Like you said, maybe the blood and guts era is not something that is all that conducive to a good business. But you started there. When you go into that class, and that's what you see, these really tough as nails guys, did you feel like, okay, this is the place for me, or did it take a little bit of a time to getting adjusted to the kind of training and the environment? I'm just trying to get a sense of what the feeling was like back then, because like you said, I mean, a lot of people don't know how it used to be, and they have these ideas of how the training used to be then. And then they contrast it with the MMA training that is like the biggest thing right now. And then they say like, but MMA is like that's real training, and all the other stuff that's not really all that efficient or effective. And my thought is then that maybe you weren't there back in the day, but they did train pretty hard. So what on a personal level, how did you feel when you started training there?
Well, I really did know. I really don't understand why I started or have this what turns out to be this obsessive a commitment to learning this stuff, And as a kid growing up, I mean, there's always fight scenes in movies, and there's at that time, David Carradine was on television in Kung Fu, and the Kung Fu TV show, and Billy Jack was beating up bad guys in the movies. And I just have this odd obsession about how to do that. How are they do there's a way to do this, and how do you do it, And so basically I got out of high school from the New York City area, and got on a motorcycle with two friends, and we left for years. And so the second winter I was in Texas, and that's how I stumbled upon this Ed Parker school in a city nearby. So anyway, I said I had to do it. I didn't. All I knew about it was from movies, and went in there. And so Parker's system, and also the knockoff of it, the Tracy Kempo system, pretty much half-hour private lessons, and then we had group class on a Saturday, and we always had fighting after the group class. And so the brown belts would often teach the private lessons, And so I was there twice a week, and I to my memory it was only half an hour, but it might have been 45 minutes. I can't remember. And you learned Kempo karate, and it was kind of tough. And then on Saturdays schools would be invited in, and we would just fight. But there never really was terrible. There never really were terrible fights. They were usually quite safe, and there was hardly any problems, and no one got mad and all that stuff, you know. And Parker Kempo was very much when you sparred, it was quite different than you know the rigorous karate movements and katas and all that stuff. And it was really just freestyle kickboxing, and other martial arts then weren't quite used to that. They were still adhering to what they were learning in their original structures. So we usually did very well. And then there were some tournaments, you know, we usually did very well. And the only guys that we could not easily overcome were the Kajakimbo guys. And that became my first relationship with Kajakimbo, which I'm in Professor Gaylord's family tree of Kajakimbo, that I've stayed connected with many of those people, you know. And so, but Kajakimbo is also very similar through Hawaii to the Parker Kempo. So it was a natural connection. So, so I don't quite know why. I mean, some people like golf, some people like tennis. Why I took to this so well, and then of course I had to have some sort of income in life, so I wound up going in the army. So that kind of was the end of my Ed Parker Kempo days.
Well, you kind of touched already on one of the things I wanted to ask you, and so I'll quickly give you the similarity. I started with judo and jiu-jitsu, very traditional, found by accident the Chinese traditional martial art, did full contact competition, and then found other arts, Filipino martial arts, Indonesian, and I always wonder because you often see people start with a martial art or a system and then just stay there for forever, basically. And then you've got people who, like you and me also, seem to do a different path and just keep exploring other arts and actually training very seriously in these other arts as well, as opposed to just like having a main art and then a little bit of an interest. You seem to also have really tried to dig very deep in many arts and basically explore further. Could you talk a little bit about that, because you mentioned just now that, well, you started with that Parker's Kempo, but then you branch out to something else, and is it like one thing leads to another, or was it something else?
Well, very quickly, you know, I went into the military police academy. There was a boxing program. However, you know, in the Army, you did do some Army combatives and basic training. And then then I went off to the military police academy, and they had boxing, of which was like a side thing, as well as they had sort of their version of defensive tactics. Back then, pretty much everything was called judo. Even karate was called judo, or some people knew what karate was too. So that was going on a little bit. Police judo, which is a term I still use, and the boxing. Since I was had nothing to do, and I was attending karate classes before I went in, I just naturally started doing that with a couple of nights a week, and on Saturday again, the same pattern. But when I started working, and I was at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and in South Korea, and arresting people, there was a detachment from reality. So that's when I began to realize that other things need to be looked at. Well, what about the gun? What about a knife deal? What about this isn't exactly kickboxing when you fought someone. He's jumped in the air and hit me in the mouth. You know, it just wasn't quite right. So I think that were the early seeds for me to try to find the truth. You know, the bottom line. You know, and that prompted me. I always like to say in the rest of the 70s or in the 80s, you're constantly trying to find the next best thing. And so you quickly turn to Thai boxing, or you quickly turn here. And you do this, you do these different things because you're in the pursuit of the next best thing. And so around time in 1986, I was still doing karate and jujitsu, but systems nobody knew. And old jujitsu is a stand-up thing. It's not wrestling as it's become today, you know. And I mean, you used to knock a guy around, throw him down, do a little quick something, and then transition to judo. What if you did something on the ground even further, you know? And of course, as a cop, we had to control people on the ground. And so there was this whole defensive tactics, today it would be called, stuff you did on the ground that looked like catch wrestling. Now I recognize it as that, but you had to handcuff somebody basically, and you could choke them. It's the good old days, you know. They used to say in many police training deals, it was no big deal. You throw a guy on the ground, and you tackle him, you crawl, and you choke, or you tackle him, you swim, meaning swim through his arms, and choke him out. It's very simple. It's just 3 steps. so anyway, I began to realize, you know, I needed to, somewhere there's going to be a real bunch of truth here. And do they have it? Do they have it? Do they have it? And so about 86 or so, I went to Inasano seminar, and that was so different and enlightening and, you know, diverse. And then I picked up with the one and only infamous character, Paul Vunak. And he was the hotshot street fighter in the late 80s. And I was an instructor in the progressive fighting, and used to host them in Texas. And, you know, that was very close. Their emphasis being, you know, knees, headbutts, and elbows. But headbutts can be a problem because in real life, you know, God did not make your head to be an impact weapon. And yes, they work, but sometimes they work so well, they work up against you, you know? And so you can knock yourself out doing a headbutt. And by the way, I'm not going to get into details, but that has happened to many of these proponents. But at any rate, and then I continued, I started falling into the Filipino stuff, imagining that, you know, the next best thing was there. And so I guess, I don't know what year it was, possibly 95, 96, I began to realize, you know, there is no next best thing. I'm going to have to invent the next best thing and put something together as best that I can. And so that's kind of the path that I've been, you know, exploring.
All right, excellent, thank you. There's one more thing that I'd like to ask, and this is more on a personal level. When you train in many different arts, especially for a long time, there's different ways, I guess, you can go about it. But for me, what I've always tried to do is try to be as systematic in my approach as possible. And I recognize that very much in your work, in your writing, in your videos. They're always, in my opinion, very well structured. And I think that is a really good way to learn, to have certain structure. But how do you keep everything apart, as opposed to everything becoming this big pile of just technique upon technique and system upon system where it all blends together? Or is that something you think is actually necessary and preferable, as opposed to keeping the arts at the very least in your head separate, so that if you say, we're going to do, let's say at Parker's Kempo right now in this seminar, that you don't end up doing a lot of Filipino martial arts or Aikibudo or something else, and vice versa. So how do you keep everything structured in your own head after so much training for so much time?
Well, as I've told my friends, Aikijitsu and Kachikempo and so forth, I'm not really going to teach any of that officially. I'm interested in pulling the curtains back and finding that last brick wall where the Wizard of Oz is, you know, is throwing all the levers. And I'm very interested in finding the universal truth that exists in all these different systems. let's just take the leg sweep. I'm not too concerned about where it comes from or what it's called in different places. But when you're doing a combat scenario, one of the great effective things to do is to sweep a leg, osodogari or something like that. And I dropped the name, but I don't do that in seminars ordinarily. And so if I'm just doing a hand stick knife gun seminar, which is, I don't know, 90% of what I do, it's just some pure essence that I don't care where it comes from. I'm not going to teach. I will name drop where, the first time I saw this, because I like to remind people, and almost nothing is new. It's just new to you. And so we can go back and say, well, this was done here, this was done there. And I like to give credit from where I learned something, but I'm just not collecting. I'm trying to strip this all down. And of course, we all have Bruce Lee to thank for his words and advice. And they were extremely instrumental to me. I've done Jeet Kune Do tremendously, but I don't say I teach it. I don't say I teach anything in particular. So Bruce Lee was a kind of a major philosophizer for me. And Ed Parker was pretty darn good too, and people don't give him credit, but he's got some old books and that are very inspirational also and thought-provoking. And so all the stuff that Bruce said, whittle away the excess, get down to the punch is just a punch, the kick is just a kick, and that's what I gear myself for. And of course, you've got hand, stick, knife, gun. And I'm always trying. It's a never-ending battle to strip stuff out and recognize, as I like to say so often, no matter what happens, fighting is more like checkers and less like chess. And that's what happens when, you're inside this struggle. And it's evident in arresting people. It's evident in a UFC fight. They're only doing about 9 different things, 10 different things, and it's checkers. And when I see these wrestling, these ground fighting systems, and they talk about, the chess of it, it's a chess move. Well, not really. Let me bust you in the head once, and we'll see how much chess we're playing. That's where I'm trying to go with everything, and removing the complications of all the stuff, removing the chess. Let's get back. Let's pull this curtain back. That's got all this dogma with it, and this from this country, and pull that curtain back, and there's the back wall that I'm trying to find the essential checkers, the essential truth for.
No, makes a lot of sense, and there's something my co-author Lauren Christensen often said to me, and he said that fighting should be as simple as possible. Like, don't overcomplicate it, and obviously, he has also a tremendous amount of training and experience, and we talked about that a lot. That there's a bunch of really fancy techniques that you can do, and maybe you can pull something off that looks very complex to a beginner, but nevertheless, try to keep it as simple as possible, because that's usually
and on the term of, as an instructor, and on the term of simple, Einstein said, keep it simple, but not too simple.
Yeah.
And as an instructor, we have to realize that, the simple is different to different people. And if you have an outstanding individual, in essence, complexity is simple to them. We should not be stilting them. They should be free to grow and for themselves, which is a whole other category about teaching. And so, like I said, simple is different for different people. And I am in a situation, I'm just a traveling circus. I just go to cities, and but the future is of a person is in the hands and mind and heart of the local instructor, and when you're that guy, and you're trying to maximize an individual's development. And then another thing that's kind of interesting to do is everyone should be collecting things for themselves that they can do. I'm a big person in the expression who, what, where, when, how, and why. Who are you, this person? Who are you really? And what can you really do physically, your age, your size, your strength, And so these people should get a small series of tricks that might not work well for somebody else. And so when you're teaching and you have a variety of people there, you have to show them a lot of simple stuff, but you have to remind them, you're going to make yourself, you're going to find these 5 things, these 6 things. But the problem is there's 5 or 6 knife things. There's 5 or 6 stick things. There's 5 or 6 gunfighting things. There's 5 or 6 stick fighting things on the ground. So it's gonna get tricky. You have to, when you prepare for these things, you just can't learn 5 things and think you're gonna survive crime or war, And so the instructor's got to know a lot of stuff, because he has to develop each individual and what they want and what they need and so forth. And that's the what question, one of the many what questions. What is your mission? What do you think you want? What do you really need? That kind of thing.
Yeah. No, it makes perfect sense. And you mentioned something a little bit earlier about that you sometimes drop some names when you're teaching, so that people know that this has been done before. That it's just new to you. And I really like that, because this is one of the things that I've been having sometimes discussions with people or mentioning it, is that you see a lot of more modern systems arriving now, and younger instructors who have their own experiences creating their own systems, and that's all fine. And what I've noticed is very often that they say certain things or show certain techniques, and it seems to me that they recently discovered that. And then I point them to, have you heard of the guy called William Fairbairn?
Yeah,
and
sure.
His buddy Sykes, and you and I have, but they clearly have not. And I'm like, look up, he wrote this little book, The Fendu, and it's about 100 years old. Take a look at that and see what you can find there, and then read his other stuff and understand that he was walking around a century ago, banging heads and fighting for his life in Shanghai, which was a happening place at the time, and basically came back with a very effective system that, what do you know, looks very similar to what you're doing. And I'm not saying they rip it off. It's just that, like you said, a lot of stuff maybe be new to certain people, but throughout history, throughout the different continents, different cultures, many similar situations have arisen, and systems to handle them have developed that will obviously have these similarities. So the wheel doesn't need to be reinvented, but we sometimes forget where it comes from, I guess.
And of course, two things for me, I see many things that I've been teaching for decades that are either copied, seen me, heard me, or copied it, or B, they have, by natural evolution, developed those things themselves. It's just like language, everybody speaks a language, and they invented each of theirs in isolation, but they all had developed a language. And this is true. So I don't really say anything to anybody when that pops up, unless there are some terms and things that I specifically use that they are specifically using. And well, that obviously they heard it from me. And sometimes they forget that. I'm a stickler on, and you can ask anybody in my seminars, trying to say who showed me this, where this comes from. And that was a lesson I learned in the late 80s from Larry Hartzell, who was a big JKD person and a very diverse character. And he would always say, he'd show something, and then he would say, okay, any questions? You got it? And then everybody would nod their head, and they say, okay, it's yours. And then frequently at the end of that, saying that a bunch of times, he'll say, just to mention where you got it from once in a while, because he did. He learned this from Master Chai. He learned this from Dan Inosanto, and that was a lesson to me that I still follow today. And just name dropping where I heard this or who showed me this or that kind of thing.
Yeah, you just touched upon it, and I think that's a really good point. I try to do the same thing, and most instructors I know do the same thing as well. It's a matter of just recognizing where you got it from, and also obviously showing respect to your own teachers, but also kind of goes back to what the previous point I tried to mention, is that everything has perhaps been done before, something very similar. So that means that it might be worth exploring the origins of that system or that style, where they already covered this. Like you said, just because it's new to you doesn't mean it's new. Well, maybe keep searching for the truth that you mentioned that maybe we're all looking for, and just dig deeper, as opposed to yours only style or your instructor or what have you, and looking at that as like the ultimate truth from that one limited source. I just wanted to ask one more thing, because we're closing in on about the half-hour mark. You've been training and teaching for a very long time, obviously, so you've seen a lot of fads come and go. Where do you think the whole, let's say, martial arts self-defense sphere is heading off to right now? Positive, negative, whatever I mean, when you look into your crystal ball, how do you see things evolving?
Well, I've been around since the ninja days, and that goes back to the 70s, and seen things come and go, and probably right now, of course, the big to me in martial arts and also many other things is the grass is always greener someplace else. And so, you could have a terrific combative system, but there's just something magical about it coming from Israel, or you could have it's just something magical about the grass being always greener someplace else. And in the mystical world that we hold, many have in the martial arts, every system has to have a unique story. Oh, it comes from the sewers of Spain. It comes from here. We just mentioned one about the Shanghai, and it's very difficult to have a popular system without a mythology, without a story behind it. And some of these guys they make up the story, so that they can, market and sell a particular idea. But as far as the future is concerned, I do see MMA, which I think is terrific. It's as close as you're going to get to the point where they still have rules, but it's stand up. It's a kickboxing stand up, a lot of takedowns from standing, and you hit the ground. Why wrestle? Beat the snot out of them and wrestle. You're going to wrestle a little bit, but it sure makes a difference with ground and pound, And so that is a tremendous evolution. And these guys, they just want to win. They don't care where it comes from. They're not all wrapped up in one of these curtains that I'm trying to pull back, And so that's a big deal. And if you want, and also thanks to the magic of what I just said about the grass being greener and oh my gosh, the wonderful mythology. Apparently, and I can tell you, and it'd take a long time in a conversation, how I was around when Krav Maga kind of started to become a fad. And it's an interesting business study. It's an interesting business development, but they try to do a lot of that, and they cheat. And to some extent, they try to bring a bunch of weaponry in it, meaning, stick, knife, and gun. And so I have a feeling that those two, will sort of sort of be around for a good length of time. And I don't really see us dropping back into a kung fu school in every corner, like the old days when different martial arts were booming. So I would have to predict that. And of course, I'm neither MMA nor am I Krav Maga, so I'm not as famous as any of those. So that's me shooting myself in the foot. I have a very good friend who is a terrific martial artist of many systems, and he had a program that was not too successful. And so he went somewhere and he got certified in Krav Maga. I think he had 14 students, he told me, under the name of his thing. They went to Krav Maga, he got certified, he came back and he said, Hock, within 2 months, I had 44 people just because of that shingle, that marketing, that magic marketing name,
Yeah.
So I have been around. I've been in, I don't know. I on my webpage, I've just for the heck of it, since it's my 25th anniversary this year, I counted all the American cities, which were hundreds. I don't know off the top of my head. They're on my webpage somewhere. And then I had been to 175 foreign cities to teach, many of them several times. And so every one of them is a business story by the host. And so over these 25 years, I've kind of gotten a lot of education and information on of this, their failures, the school success, what happened, what didn't happen, and that's always COVID has just really been a problem,
Yeah. Yeah, for a lot of people, especially and in the martial arts community, obviously, with as it's a contact sport, the lockdowns they weren't all that great for us. Hock, anything that you can share that you're working on right now, like book, video, article, anything that people should look out for?
I haven't done any training videos in a long time because we're just smothered with piracy, and two, YouTube. So if you're out there, or a person's out there and they have this bizarre sudden interest for, let's just say, a wrist lock, they just go to YouTube and see 18 different 3-minute clips on wrist locks, and they are sated. And so they're not prone to buy videos anymore. And so while I have 44 training videos, it's a whole lot, but for many, many years, I just can't get myself motivated to do another one, But I have gone through this epiphany, which I call the Stop Six. And the Stop Six program, it's not a ranking system or anything like that. It's just a skeletal system for training. And it's the 6 common stopping points of a typical fight or arrest. One might say it's ranges, but it's really not. And it'd take too long to describe them, but they are an excellent way to organize reality fighting. And, it starts with everything that is no contact, hand, stick, knife, and gun. And it goes through stop 2 to stop 6 of the 6, which is hand, stick, knife, gun on the ground. It might at times resemble BJJ. It might at times resemble catch-can wrestling, which, by the way, I'm fascinated in and way more interested in doing than other ground stuff. And so what I've done is I'm writing a series of books, the training mission books, 1 through 6, covering each stop, as well as some related information, hand, stick, knife, gun, checkers, crystal, clear, simple material that I can amass. And there may be, I'm working on stop 3 now. 1 and 2 are done, paperback or collectible hardcover textbooks, which I think are beautiful, and there may be 7 or 8 because I'd like to demonstrate various combat scenarios, hand, stick, knife, gun. And so it may tiptoe past stop 6, but this is what I'm struggling. It's a struggle. It's a puzzle piece. It's trying to fit everything where it needs to be, and like that. And so that's kind of what I'm doing. Next year, I have 12 USA seminars already booked, and with no idea about Europe or Australia. Australia is insane now.
Yeah.
And you could go to a country and find yourself locked up for 14 days.
Yeah.
Or you can't come back. They're talking about coming back to America and being no matter who you are, no matter how many shots you have, you'll be quarantined for 7 days. And so I'm not looking to maybe winter 2022. I can see all my friends again in England and Hungary and Italy and Germany. And of course, I love to go to Australia. I love Australia. I've been going there for decades, but man, is it crazy there now. I'm liable to go there and be put in jail, And then, of course, I despite all this busyness on the side, I still write novels. And I just got one detective novel done. These are done by a conventional publishing house, Wolfpack in Las Vegas. And so I'm writing the more or less how-to Marshall books, and also writing these novels.
All right. And where can people contact you or find all the books and everything else you have?
The challenge is spelling my last name. But if you just put Hock, Hock, martial art books, I'll bet come up. Our webpage, my courses are called Force Necessary. Sometimes force is necessary, and only use that force necessary to win or survive, depending on who you are and what the situation is. And so basically it's www. the English word force, and then the English word necessary.com. And that's, how to springboard into seeing all the videos, the martial art books, and reading these action-packed thriller novels.
Excellent. And for all the listeners, I will look all that up and I will put that in the show notes, and you can find a link to the show notes. You can find in the description of this podcast. So I'll make sure that people can find that. All right. Well, I think we're coming pretty much at the end of the interview. Now, for the listeners, Hock and I are going to keep recording another little segment for my Patreon, where Hock is going to answer some questions that my patrons were dying to ask him. So I'll put a link towards that episode as well. In the meantime, Hock, before we end this first part, anything else you might want to add as parting words?
No matter what you're doing in any martial art that it is, know why you're doing it and what you want to do, who, what, where, when, how, and why. And if you just love karate and you are just crazy about it, just keep doing karate. And if you're happy, I'm happy. Just know why you're doing what you're doing and what you want to accomplish. And so every martial art is terrific exercise, and it's also usually a terrific social endeavor where you have great friends and experiences. And like I said, if you're happy with what you're doing, I'm happy.
All right, that's excellent advice, folks. Check out the show notes, and you will find, like I said, the link in the description. I'm going to put links to everything that we mentioned here, and so you can find Hock's books and videos and everything that he has. Do check it out. I first encountered Hock's writing many years ago, and I've been following it ever since, and I can very much recommend it to you. So don't hesitate and do that as well. Hock, a special thanks to you for taking the time. I know you're a busy man, so I appreciate it. And I hope everybody enjoys this just as much as I just enjoyed talking to you and getting to pick your brain a little bit. All right.
Adios, amigos.
Okay. Thank you, folks. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.wimsblog.com.